Hello and welcome back to another full step-by-step PC build guide, and today I'm going to be showing you how to build a PC in the new flagship from SaharaGaming, the P480. So let's take a look at the other parts I'm going to be building with today. For the motherboard I'm going to be using ASRock's X670E at Taichi Carrara. For the CPU I'm going to be using AMD's Ryzen 9, the 7900X. Keeping our CPU cool, I've got a 360mm AIO from DeepCool. It's the LT720 in white. For RAM, I've got 32GB of Kingston Fury Renegade DDR5 at a blistering fast 7200 megatransfers per second. For storage, I'm going with a single Gen 4 NVMe M.2 drive for this build. It's from ADATA and it's their Legend 960 and 1TB capacity. Powering the whole build, I'm going to be using MONTECH's Titan Gold 1200 watt fully modular ATX 3.0 power supply. For the graphics card, I'm going to be using the Asus TUF Gaming RTX 4070 Ti. For case fans, I'm going to be using AMD's SL Infinity Uni fans in white. And the final parts for today's build are some white cable extensions and also a Gen 4 riser cable. Okay, that's all the parts, let's build. So as usual, I'm going to make a start by preparing our case, and as we go I'll point at all the case's main features. So to get our tempered glass side panel removed, we're first going to need to remove the top panel. The top panel is held on with a captive thumb screw at the back. Once it's been loosened, the panel can be slid backwards, lifted up and away. If we take a look at the back of the panel we've just removed, you'll notice that SaharaGaming are going with just mesh at the top. There's no dust filter underneath the panel, but this shouldn't create any problems as most people will be having this as an exhaust. You'll notice that our tempered glass side panel has a fairly dark tint on it, and with our top panel removed, we're now going to be able to remove the tempered glass side panel. To do this, all we need to do is lift it up from the bottom, and then we're going to be able to lift it away. Taking a look at our other side panel, you notice we've got this perforated area in it, indicating that we're going to be able to side mount fans in this case. The panel is removed exactly the same way as a tempered glass panel, just lift it up from the bottom and lift away. Taking a look at the back of the panel we've just removed, you'll notice we've got a magnetically attached dust filter, which can simply be pulled away for cleaning. Taking a look at the front of the case, we've got the SaharaGaming logo here and our front I/O here. In terms of our front I/O, we've got a power and reset button, a combined headphone and microphone jack, we've got two USB Type-A ports and a single Type-C port. We've got a tempered glass panel on the front of the case and it can simply be pushed out and lifted away. This panel here is also removable and it's removed exactly the same way as the tempered glass panel, just push it out and lift away. You might wonder why you would want to remove it. The only reason you'd want to remove it if you were wanting to add a mesh panel to the front. The case comes in two versions. We've got the tempered glass, which we have, and there's also a mesh panel, which is one piece. So that's the reason why this panel comes off. At the moment, SaharaGaming are only selling the case in two different versions, the one that we have with the tempered glass panel and the one with the full mesh panel. But I would imagine in the future you're going to be able to buy the mesh panel as an optional extra and replace the tempered glass panel with it. There's no reason for us to remove this panel for our build, so I'm just going to put it back in place. With our tempered glass panel removed at the front of the case, you'll notice that we've got this fan bracket at the front. In this you're going to be able to mount up to two 120mm fans. The only slight problem I can see is this is going to be right up against the tempered glass panel. So in terms of airflow, these fans are going to do absolutely nothing. And it's really, with the tempered glass version of the case, it's really just going to be aesthetics. As I mentioned, the case comes with a mesh panel where the fans at the front are actually going to provide some benefit. This front fan bracket is removable. It's held on with two screws. And then when the screw is removed, the bracket can simply be lifted away. So one important thing to point out about this front fan bracket is you're not going to be able to use it with AMD Uni fans. So I put screws into the bottom of the AMD Uni fan, but you'll notice then that the holes aren't lining up with the holes on the fan. And this is because it's designed to have a slight gap between your two 120mm fans, and the AMD Uni fans are mounted flush together, which means that this top fan is actually too low for the holes in the bracket. Now this isn't going to be a problem for me because I don't think it makes sense to have fans at the front of the case when they're not actually going to be contributing to airflow and potentially causing noise by being right up against the front tempered glass panel. But if you were planning to have fans at the front, and in particular if you've gone with the mesh version of the case, just be aware it's not going to work with the AMD Uni fans. So if we take a closer look at our case, you'll notice that it's actually quite a long case. It is a dual chamber case. We've got this separate compartment at the back for our power supply with a perforated area on it. So all these factors are going to play an important part in what fans and radiator support we can put in the case. So in this perforated area in front of our power supply, you're going to be able to mount either two 120 or two 140mm fans. Down at the bottom of the case is actually up to 4 120mm fans, or up to 2 140mm fans. Because the power supply compartment protrudes into the front of the case, that's the reason why you can only fit 2 140mm fans, and you can't install them in front of this compartment. If you prefer, down at the bottom of the case, it's up to a 360 or 280mm radiator. At the top of the case, you can also fit up to 4 120mm fans, but this time you can fit one extra 140mm fan with up to 3 supported at the top. In terms of radiator support, you're really spoilt in this case. You can actually at the top fit up to a 480mm radiator, but if you want to go with more standard size AIOs, you can also fit your 360 or 280mm radiator. At the rear of the case, you can fit either a 120 or 140mm fan or radiator. In terms of motherboard support, it's up to ATX, and if you want to go with a CPU air cooler, you'll be pleased to hear you can fit really large air coolers up to a maximum height of 185mm. In terms of graphics card support, it depends how you're going to mount your graphics card in the case. If you go horizontally, your limitation is going to be this power supply compartment coming into the case, and you've got up to 340mm for your graphics card. There is also the option to mount vertically, and that is going to bring it in front of this compartment where you've got the full length of 480mm for your graphics card. At the rear of the case, we've got 7 horizontal PCI expansion slot brackets, but this whole bracket is actually rotatable, allowing you to mount your graphics card vertically without an additional bracket. So to free up this bracket, we've got 5 screws we need to remove. So with all 5 screws removed, the bracket is free to be lifted out from the case. All we'll need to do is rotate it around 90 degrees and line it back up again, and then we can secure it into place with the same 5 screws. So importantly, while this is now going to let you mount your graphics card vertically in the case without needing to buy an additional bracket, the riser cable that you're going to need doesn't come with the case, so you're going to have to pick that up at additional cost. On the bottom of the case, we've got a full-length magnetically attached dust filter, which can simply be pulled away for cleaning. You'll notice we've got this cutout at the bottom of the case, although there's no cutout in the dust filter, and I'm assuming this is to allow you to put your finger in and access the power supply's on-off switch. As you'll see when we install our power supply, you're not going to have access to that switch if this cutout wasn't here. Moving into the rear of the case, and our power supply is going to go behind this mesh door. To open the mesh door, we've got 3 screws on the left-hand side we need to remove. So with the 3 screws removed, we're going to be able to open this door. There's a little slot here you can get your finger into and then open the door all the way up. So in here we've got our instruction manual, and we've also got our accessory box. So you can see we've got all our case cables here coming from the front I/O, and we're going to mount our power supply at the bottom here in this removable bracket. And the case is compatible with full-sized ATX power supplies up to a maximum length of 200mm. So to remove this bottom bracket, there's 2 screws we need to remove. Then with the 2 screws removed, to remove this bracket, all we need to do is pull it towards ourselves. So the other option that we have for this mesh door is to remove it all together, and to do that there's 2 screws, one at the bottom and one at the top we need to remove. So now with all the screws removed, this panel is completely free and we can simply lift it out of the case, giving us improved access for the build process. So taking a look at the back of the case, it's good to see we've got cutouts in sensible places, and the 2 large cutouts over to the right hand side have got rubber grommets on them. And you can see here we've also got a rubber grommet on the cutout going through to the power supply compartment. So because our power supply is going to be at the front of the case, but in general you plug your cables into the rear of the case, we've got this extension cable running all the way down to here, and we're going to actually plug this end into our power supply. In terms of drive support, we've got 3 removable drive brackets at the back of the case. They're each held on with a captive thumb screw, and once it has been loosened, the bracket can simply be lifted up and away. Onto the back of each of these brackets, you're going to be able to either fit a 3.5 inch or 2.5 inch drive. And you can see that the holes on the drive bracket are actually labelled. So it's 1 for a 3.5 inch drive and 2 for a 2.5 inch drive. And we've got the numbers here in each of the corners. So installing your drive on the bracket should be straightforward. In the case accessory box, you get another 2 of these drive brackets, giving you a total of 5 of them in the case. And if you don't want to put fans on the side of the case, you can actually set the brackets into place here and then screw them in. And another one is going to go up here and a screw hole here. So that's going to mean you're going to mount another 2 drives in the main body of the case. We're now ready to start working on our motherboard, and we're going to be installing our CPU, the bracket for our CPU cooler, our M.2 SSD and our RAM before we put the motherboard into the case. So to install our CPU, we need to open the socket cover. So we need to push this lever down and out and then bring it all the way towards the middle of the motherboard, and then we should be able to open the socket cover up. We can then set our CPU into the socket, line it up with the notches at the top and at the bottom, and making sure the text is the correct way up. Once we've got it into the socket, it's just a little wobble from side to side to check it's in correctly. And once we're happy it is, we can go ahead and close the socket cover again. Then all we need to do is close this lever again to secure our CPU in the socket, and as we do it, the black bit of plastic will pop off, and we'll put this in the motherboard box for safekeeping. Next, we've got our M.2 SSD, and we need to remove the heatsink, which is held on with 2 screws. We can then insert our drive into the socket, wiggling it into place. And then if we flatten the drive down and secure it with a screw from the motherboard box. If you're using the motherboard from new, there'll be some plastic protection in the back of the heatsink you need to remove. I've used this motherboard before, which is why there's none here. Next, we need to install our RAM. As we've only got 2 sticks, we're going to install it in the 2nd and 4th slot along from the CPU, so we can open the clips on both sides of the slots. Then all we're going to do is line the RAM up with the slot. Once we're happy we've got the RAM lined up, it's just some firm pressure to the RAM, and it's going to clip into place. Then it's the same thing with our 2nd stick, line it up with a slot, and again some firm pressure, and it will clip into place. To install the mounting brackets for our CPU cooler, we first need to remove the stock AMD clips. They're each held on with 2 screws. And the best place to keep all these is in the motherboard box so you don't lose them. And then we've got one of these standoffs to screw on to each corner. Before we put our motherboard into the case, we've got 3 additional standoffs that we need to add into place. If you're not sure where the standoffs go, each of the holes at the back of the case are labelled with a letter, and then you've got a code here which tells you, depending on the size of the motherboard that you've got, where the standoffs need to go. So SaharaGaming have only installed 6 of the standoffs. For our motherboard, we have an additional 3 to put into place. So you're going to get the additional standoffs in the case accessory box, but unfortunately SaharaGaming haven't included the tool that you're going to need to put the standoffs into place. You can try screwing them in by hand. So I have managed to get the middle standoff screwed in all the way by hand, but this bottom one is really tight and I can't get it screwed in by hand. And the majority of the times you do need a tool to insert the standoffs. Now unfortunately SaharaGaming haven't included this with the case. I do have a tool from another case that fits on most standoffs from other manufacturers, but unfortunately these standoffs are actually quite big and the standoff insertion and removal tool won't go over the top of it. So the only other option I have is to use a pair of pliers. Next we can insert the motherboard into the case, lining it up with the standoffs at the back. And you'll notice that once we get the motherboard lined up with the middle standoff is going to come through the motherboard and help hold it in place. And then we can secure the motherboard to the case with 9 of the screws with a little lip around the outside from the case accessory box. Next thing to do is get our case cables plugged in. Our HD audio cable is going to go into this header down at the bottom left hand side of the motherboard. So we can bring the cable through the cutout at the bottom. You'll notice on the header we've got a pin missing, so we are going to have to plug this in with the HD audio text facing down the way. And then we can pull the excess cable through to the back. Our front panel connectors are going to go into this header down the bottom right hand side of the motherboard, so we'll go ahead and bring the cables through the cutout at the bottom. So you'll notice we've got a whole range of different cables and they're going to need to go into specific pins on this header, so it is important you follow the diagram in the motherboard manual. So starting off with the bottom row, pins 1 and 2 are for hard drive LED positive and hard drive LED negative. Next to that on the bottom row we've got a reset switch. It doesn't matter which way this cable goes. Moving up to the top row, pins 1 and 2 from the left hand side are for power LED positive and power LED negative. And then next to that, into pins 3 and 4 is for our power switch. Again, it doesn't matter which way this one goes, I'm just going to plug it in with the text facing down the way. And then with all our cables plugged in, we can just pull the excess cable through to the back. Our USB 3.0 cable is going to go into this header here, so we'll go ahead and bring it through the cutout, line it up with the header, and push into place, and then pull the excess cable through to the back. Just below that, we've got our Type-C header, so we'll go ahead and bring the cable through the cutout, line it up with the header, and push into place. And then again, pull the excess cable through to the back. So at this stage in most builds, I would normally install the power supply. The only issue is once we put the power supply into here, it's going to block the access to the side fans. So I'm going to go ahead and install the fans next. So the first thing for us to do is join the two Lian Li uni fans together. So it's just a matter of lining the connectors up at the side and then pushing down to secure the two fans together. So because we're not adding any additional fans on this end, the little connectors we can twist around and pull out. And then on the other end of the fans, we're going to take the connector, which comes with a triple pack of fans, and push it up into place. I'm then going to pass the cable coming from the fans through this cutout at the bottom, and then I'm going to line the fans up on the side of the case, having them set to intake. And then we can secure the fans into place at the back. So you'll notice I've just secured our top fan with screws, and the reason for this is exactly the same problem as we had with the front fan bracket. SaharaGaming are expecting you to install two fans with a gap between them, not two fans directly touching each other. So the holes don't match up for the bottom fan because our two fans are joined directly together. So this is a little bit disappointing. They've gone with single holes rather than elongated slots, which gives you some flexibility with where you're going to screw your fans in and some flexibility on the placement rather than just exact placement for each of the fans. So Lian Li uni fans are probably not the best type of fans to use in this case, but because it seems reasonably secure with just the top fan in place, I'm going to use it for this build. I've got four 120mm fans for the bottom, so I'm just going to pass the cable through to the back, and then we can slide the fans into place at the bottom. There we go. And then we can get the fans screwed into place at the bottom of the case. And then we can replace the bottom dust filter. We can then add in another 140mm fan at the rear set to exhaust. Okay, so next thing to do is get the fans plugged into our Lian Li uni fan hub. So on this hub we've got 4 channels, 1, 2, 3 and 4. So I'm going to take the cable coming from our rear fan and plug it into channel number 1. Then we've got the cable coming from our bottom fans into channel number 2. And then our side fans into channel number 3. We're obviously going to need to power this hub, and coming from the bottom of the hub we've got 2 SATA connectors which will plug into a SATA cable coming from our power supply once we've installed it. On the bottom of the hub we've got 2 additional cables we need to plug in. The first is a USB cable, so it's just going to push into place. And on the other end we've got a USB 2.0 cable which is going to plug into a USB 2.0 header on our motherboard. We've then got this smaller double cable which is going to go into the bottom right hand side. And coming from it, we've got 2 connectors. The first is a 4-pin PWM connector, which is going to plug into a system fan header. And the other cable then is a 3-pin 5V ARGB header, which is going to plug into an ARGB header on the motherboard. And these 2 cables are going to allow our motherboard to control the fan speed and also the lighting. So I've gone ahead and brought the 3 cables coming from our Lian Li uni fan hub through to the bottom of the case. And we've got headers down the bottom of the motherboard to plug them into. So starting off with the PWM connector, we'll line it up with the header and push into place. 2 headers along, we've got an ARGB header, and then next to that we've got a USB 2.0 header. Okay, so that's all 3 of those cables plugged in. We'll just pull all the excess cable through to the back. We're now ready to install our power supply, and it is fully modular, coming without any of the cables plugged in. I've gone ahead and plugged in the cables that we're going to need. So I plugged in a 24-pin cable, 2 8-pin EPS cables, a 12V high power cable, and a SATA power cable. The reason we plugged the SATA power cable in is to power our Lian Li uni fan hub. You also notice I plugged in some white cable extensions. These aren't essential, they just improve the look of the build, so if you want to leave these out, you'll be fine doing that. So just before we put the bracket onto the back of our power supply, there's 2 important things we're going to need to do for this build. Our power supply has a smart zero fan mode, so when it's under low loads, the fan will stop spinning, helping reduce the noise of our build. So this seems like a good idea to me. I'm going to turn it on. And the other thing, because of how we're installing our power supply, we're not going to have great access to this switch, so I'm going to make sure it's turned on. We can then line our bracket up with the back of the power supply, and then we'll get it screwed into place with 4 of the larger screws from the case accessory box. So before we get the power supply into the case, we've got a little cutout on the side, so I'm going to bring the extension cable through the cutout, line it up with the power supply, and push it into place at the bottom, and then pull all the excess cable through the cutout at the side. We can then move the case cables out of the way, and then we can line the power supply up at the bottom of the case. And then we'll secure the power supply into the place at the bottom with the 2 screws already removed at the start. So our EPS cables for additional power to our CPU are going to go into these 2 headers at the top left of the motherboard. So we'll bring the cables through the cutout, line them up with a header, and push into place. And then you'll notice in our cables we've got some cable combs to help organise the cables. Our 24-pin cable is going to go into this header here, and we've got a choice. We can bring it through the standard cutout, but there's also a little cutout with a rubber grommet on it coming directly from the power supply compartment. So cable management should be a little bit easier if we bring it through from here. So we can line the cable up with a header and push into place. And again, we've got some cable combs to help organise the cable. We're now ready to start working our I/O, and rather than using the fans that came with the I/O because they don't have any ARGB on them, I'm going to use some AMD uni fans. If you want to know how to install the I/O with the original fans, I've made a full step-by-step guide to it, so I'll put a link to that video in the description. So I'm out of the SL Infinity uni fans, so I'm just using the standard SL V2 uni fans. So the first thing to do is get the fans attached to the radiator. We're going to use these long radiator screws to do it. So just a matter of popping the screws through the fans and then into the radiator. So in terms then of connecting up the cables, coming from our fans, I've plugged in the standard double splitter cable that comes with a single pack of the fans. We've got a 4-pin PWM connector we're going to plug into our CPU fan header. On the other end, we've got these 2 cables which I've gone ahead and joined together, and we've got a standard 3-pin 5V ARGB connector which we're going to plug into an ARGB header on our motherboard. Coming from our pump, we've got 2 cables. We've got a 3-pin fan connector which we're going to plug onto the pump header on our motherboard. And then we've got a 3-pin 5V ARGB connector, and that's going to go into an ARGB header on the motherboard. Now we can plug this into a separate ARGB header, or what we can do is plug this into the ARGB header on the motherboard, and then pull off this connector, and then we're going to plug the cable coming from our fans into here. So that way, both the pump and the fans are only using one ARGB header on the motherboard. So for installing this I/O, we can actually go ahead and remove the cover. It's just magnetically attached, so we're going to be able to pull it off. So if you're getting this I/O from new, there will be some thermal paste pre-applied. I've already used this I/O, so that's why there's not any here. But if there is thermal paste in your I/O, be really careful at this stage so you don't actually damage it. So we're going to put the bracket on to secure the pump to our motherboard. What I would recommend doing, if you've got the thermal paste pre-applied, do this step after you've installed the radiator in the case, because if you leave this exposed with the thermal paste on it, the chances are you will damage it. So what we can do is take our AMD brackets and slot them into place, lining them up with the holes. There we go. And then we can set the screw into place, and it is magnetically attached. And then it's just the same thing on the other side. Then we can set our I/O into place at the top of the case, and then we'll get it screwed into place using the short radiator screws at the top. I'm then just going to pass the cables coming from the fans and the radiator through to the back. Next I'm going to add some thermal paste to the centre of the CPU. Remember, if you're getting the I/O from new, it will have thermal paste pre-applied and you don't need to add more. So just before we install the pump on the CPU, I want to show you how I like to manage the cables. So I like to wrap the cables up and round the outside of the cold plate towards the top of the cooler, and it just helps tidy the cables up. So we've got this 3-pin fan connector that I'm going to do this with. I'm also going to bring the cable coming from the cable cover up the same way, so it's going to be nice and tidy. And then I'm just going to line this up with the bracket beneath. And what we need to do now is to get a thumb screw onto each corner. So I'm also just checking to make sure that our cables are nice and free and they're not trapped onto the cold plates, which they're definitely not. Then I'm just going to tighten each of the thumb screws in turn. Then I'm going to be able to replace the cover on the pump, just pulling the RGB cable up as we go. And then I'm going to route both the cables up towards the top of the motherboard. At the top of the motherboard, we've got 3 fan headers. The one to the left is our CPU fan header, so I'm going to bring the cable coming from the fans and the radiator through, line it up with the header and push into place, and then pull the excess cable through to the back. The next fan header along is our pump header, so I'll bring the cable coming from the pump through, line it up with the header and push into place, and then I'm just going to tuck all the excess cable up towards the top of the motherboard. Our RGB cable I'm going to bring through to the back of the case. Then I can take the protective covering off the splitter cable, and then I'm going to line up the RGB cable coming from our fans on the radiator and push into place. And then I'm going to bring this cable back through to the front of the case, and we'll get it plugged into one of the 2 RGB headers on the top right of the motherboard. And if you are using the IO from new, there'll be some plastic protection here and here that you need to remove. We're now ready to install our GPU, and I'm going to install this as far towards the front as I can in the vertical position. So I'm going to remove the first 2 slots from the front. The only slight issue I'm seeing is I'm not going to be able to get a screwdriver in here with this rear fan installed. So I'm going to uninstall the rear fan and I'll put it back in place once the graphics card has been installed. What I'm going to do now is open the clip in the top PCIe slot. I'm going to line our riser cable up with the slot and push it into place. I'm then going to line our graphics card up with the other end of the cable and push it into place. We can then line the graphics card up with the case and lower it into place. And then we'll secure it into place with the 2 screws we've just removed. We can then bring our 12-volt high power cable through the cutout. We'll line it up with a connector on the top of the graphics card and push into place, making sure we get a nice satisfying click. And again, we've got some cable combs on the cable to help organize it. Okay, last thing to do is some cable management, so we're able to get the side panel back on again. So that's the build complete and looking great. If you don't know how to install Windows, install your drivers, get your RGB software installed and set up, enter the BIOS, update the BIOS and adjust all the BIOS settings, I've made a video on that. So I'll put a link to that video in the description. If you follow this guide up to this stage and then look at that video, you'll be able to get your PC up and running and looking just as good as I've got it here. If you do look closely at this PC, you'll notice it does look a little bit different to the one I've just built in the video. The reason for that is I've already gone on ahead and done quite a bit of detailed thermal testing, adding in the front fans, removing the side fans, and adjusting some of the cable management at the back so it doesn't obstruct the side intake. So if you are thinking of doing a build in this case, you're definitely going to want to check out that video, and I'll put a link to it in the description. So hopefully you have enjoyed this build guide. If you have, please remember to give it a thumbs up, and if you're not currently subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button as well. Thanks for watching.